So let's look at other ways. Other ways people try to reduce tax liability. Okay, so other ways people try to reduce tax liability. So what are some of the other ways people try to reduce tax liability? We have two main methods, right? Tax avoidance and tax evasion. There's another thing we call tax sheltering. Okay, but let's just call tax sheltering a tax avoidance strategy, right? Things that I don't think I need to teach you in class, so let's just leave that bit. Okay. So now, these are the two main methods people use to reduce their tax liability. Okay, so some people end up doing evasion without knowing, okay? But then whether evasion or avoidance, it all begins with tax risks. And as a practitioner, you must know how to deal with tax risks. Now, every taxpayer has some roles he needs to play under the tax law, okay? Has some roles he needs to play under the tax law. And what are those roles? You need to register with the authority, file your taxes, right? Through filing, you declare appropriate incomes, then you pay your taxes. True or false? This is your obligation. In case somebody fails to register or stays out of the registration system, that means it calls for what we call a registration risk, right? So these are taxpayer risks. Now, what if you decide not to file or you do not? You're getting a sore throat. So filing at the wrong time, not filing on the due date. It's an example of filing risk, right? Okay. Now, declaration risk is where you fail to declare the appropriate one. Mostly, this is where we have things like what? Under declaration, mostly overclaiming expenses, under declaring income. This is the common type. Then we have payment risk. This is where you fail to pay, right? Or you pay the wrong amount. Payment wrong or non-payment, right? So for registration, it's either you don't register or you are wrongly registered. Do you know you can wrongly be registered for tax? Do you know that? Or you don't believe you can wrongly be registered? You don't believe you can wrongly be registered, eh? You don't believe you can wrongly be registered? Who can explain wrong registration? Hmm?
So proprietor registered as a company limited liability, liability.
Somebody earning more than less than the threshold for VAT registration, the 200, and so goes ahead.
That is most of the common one that we have, right? Most of the common one that we have, and the most common one that we have, right? So you do not have, or you have not earned up to 200,000, right? But maybe your record states that you earned up to 200,000. Because of that, they registered you for VAT. Meanwhile, you are not supposed to be registered for VAT. Do you get it? Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Register for VAT. Yeah. This is mostly the problem that we face. Not so. Do you get it? So most of the time, what you have to look out for is, has the person been rightfully registered or he has been wrongly registered? Do you get the idea? These are some of the things that I expect you to always look out for, right? Okay, now, how does this relate to tax evasion and tax avoidance? Now, if these risks will happen, then it's due to tax evasion or tax avoidance. And why would it be due to tax evasion and tax avoidance? If somebody decides to stay outside the registration system, is it illegal or is legal?
Illegal.
Is it legal or illegal?
It depends. If he's not qualified to register, then it will not be illegal. But if he's qualified, he doesn't register, that be illegal.
But then I made something clear. I said staying out of the registration system. He stayed out. It's not that he just stayed out, meaning he has put measures in place to make sure that he never registers.
Okay, that will be illegal.
That would be illegal, right? Making it more of tax evasion. Do you understand? So mostly these tax risks result in mostly things the tax authority will call tax evasion, but not tax avoidance. The only part of tax avoidance will be maybe under declaration, right? But that one should be supported by some sort of documentation of some sort. So we say tax avoidance is this. Listen, people do not really understand tax avoidance. Tax avoidance is the creation of artificial transactions, right? So that means that when we say artificial, it doesn't mean it's not real. It means that that transaction was not there before, but you have created that transaction, right? So the creation of artificial transactions to exploit, okay, to exploit loopholes in the tax law, okay, with the end objective of what? This thing, right? Okay, so one, you create artificial transaction to exploit what? Loopholes in the tax law. To what? To reduce your tax liability, right? So the main thing is that tax planning has a broader scope, okay, which is not only about what reducing tax liability, but as part of tax planning, there is tax avoidance, which is the focus of what? Which has the focus of what? What's the focus of tax planning? A tax evasion, the evasion, avoidance. To avoid tax, right? So the main focus is what? The reduction of tax what? Liability. Does that make sense? So we are saying that when it comes to tax avoidance, the focus is the reduction of tax liability. But when it comes to tax evasion, evasion is where you use what? Dubious or illegal means to bypass or to escape the payment of what? To escape the payment of taxes. I hope that makes sense. So using dubious or illegal means to escape the payment of taxes. That is what we call what? Tax evasion. Are we okay? So before we look at tax evasion and tax avoidance schemes, my question is, why do people avoid and evade taxes in Ghana? So why do people avoid and evade taxes in Ghana? Yes, I'm waiting for your answers.
To increase their disposable income, because tax reduces the income levels of the citizens.
So minimize tax liability, and then what? increase disposable income. Okay. Okay. 2, what other reason?
Sometimes ignorance of the law can lead to that.
You there?
Sometimes ignorance of the law can also lead to that.
So lack of tax education, right? So lack of tax education.
And then sometimes the motivation could be to sabotage the economy, and to influence a change in national leadership.
Okay, so I like that point. Influence change in politics, right? Or political ambitions too. People feel like, oh, why? Because of lack of tax education, why should I pay so that somebody will come and use my money to go and build a hotel in Dubai, all right? So they do not understand. And do you also think that the problem of convenience is a problem? Because of convenience,
Yes.
people are inconvenienced. How do you explain this point? How do we explain this point that people are inconvenienced when it comes to taxes in Ghana?
I mean, to leave your day-to-day activities and to go to the tax authorities to file your tax returns, and it involves a whole lot of laborious processes. And especially when you go to the GRE, there are forms. Sometimes when you are even a very educated person, it becomes very difficult to fill out the forms in just a few minutes, as it were, unless because you are very conversant with it. So the processes of filing and paying the taxes itself, I mean, of late they have tried to bring the online system and others to reduce those, but people still have challenges paying the taxes, as it were, especially even with the online system of payment.
You have problems on the portal. Yeah, that
Yes.
is. But then, what is the major issue of convenience when it comes to taxes in Ghana, apart from you filing and you doing all that? So convenience is not only in terms of you going to GRE, but what other aspects are taxpayers inconvenienced? Look at it in a broader scope.
Harassment from the tax collectors.
Okay, you said what? Harassment from the tax
collectors. Sometimes they harass.
Or even tax audit. Legitimate tax audit exercises are very disruptive.
Okay.
The rate to apply.
The rates to apply.
That changes mostly. There are sometimes changes. You don't know which one to apply.
Okay. So sometimes our tax system do not have the appropriate canons, right? That means the effectives like economy, you are looking at economy, you are looking at effectiveness, or you can even look at convenience. These people want to off lights. We better go. So convenience, we look at what? Certainty, okay? So we can even bring certainty, right? Ghanaians are mostly uncertain about the kind of taxes they need to pay. True or false? Because our taxes keep changing anyhow. True or false?
True.
Point, a good point.
True.
Is it a good point? We have certainty. We are not sure because our taxes keep changing anyhow. So I think this is a good point, right? Okay. What about multiplicity of taxes? Do you understand what that point means? Who can explain this?
There are so many taxes, especially VAT, with so many categorizations and others, making the competitions very cumbersome.
One income, multiple taxes. Very bad. Let's see. Let's see. Somebody makes a sale of 100 cedis for goods. One, there's withholding tax at 3%, maybe one, it will be withheld. These same 100 cedis will be included in your what? Your profits, and then you pay corporate tax at what? At 20%. These same 100 cedis will be subject to VAT, MEBWA, and levies. 15.9%, levies of 6%, making 21.9%. If it's a communication-related company, this same 100 cedis will be subject to CST at 5%. If we relate to tourism, this 100 cedis will be subject to tourism levy again, 1%. Why?
Why? Is you the tax consultants will need to ask why you are promulgating all these things for the political class to go on?
That's not true.
That double taxation is the tax consultants. You are promulgating those things for them to go implement. You can tax us left, tax them back, tax them front, and that kind of thing.
Oh, but do you guys agree that it's the tax consultants who are causing these things? Or like
yes, but I don't know the technocrats at the ministries of finance and other places sitting and
okay.
deducing those taxes and levies.
Okay, I agree.
I mean, who will go and sit there and think that they should convert this get fund and this into NHIS to a levy, put the tax on tax, and that way you can increase. I mean, what kind of financial engineering is that?
You know, all these things are fueled by political ambition anyway. But the multiplicity of taxes are one of the reasons why people want to bypass the tax authorities. People want to evade taxes. What other reason can we bring in? What other reason? What are some of the reasons? Please, it should be open. We need to get as many reasons as possible. And I'll come and tell you the likely question you are expected from this side. Okay, now I told you they want tax planning to be very open, right? To go beyond dimensions. What other reason do you think people, or why do people avoid and evade taxes in Ghana? What are some of the reasons why? We have seen some of them. Most of the points I provided them. Yes, what about the rest? What about inflexibility?
I mean, the uses to which the tax is even put.
Okay, so that will be more of influence in politics and all that. So what about inflexibility of our taxes? Is our tax system flexible? I don't know if it's a good point. It's from my head. So is our tax system flexible? Is it flexible to changes? That if changes happen within the environment, it's also changing with that. If accounting standards change, our tax system is also changing with the accounting standards. Since now the IFRS has been adopted by the company code. If things change, do we see our tax system also changing with it? For instance, IFRS 16 came, right? But our tax law is still using IES. True or false? So my issue is, can you talk about maybe because of inflexibility, people decide not to pay the tax? Another issue of convenience was the issue of the Ghana card and the tin thing. Okay, I do not have a Ghana card. Okay, you are pressuring me. I've gone. My card has still not been released. This has inconvenienced a lot of Ghanaians, right? What do you think? And ends up in the tax aspect. What do you think? What do we say? True or false?
True.
True.
True. Because some people, they have not still even got their Ghana card, right?
And if, having a thin self is also another challenge.
It's also another challenge, right? So these are some of the ways taxpayers are inconvenienced. And because of these inconveniences, it also has an impact on the taxpayers, right? So I think We didn't talk about the inflexibility of our tax system. What can you say about that? Do you agree our tax system is flexible or is inflexible? Yes. Oh, I want your varied opinions. It's like people are quiet. It's supposed to be a discussion, not me teaching and you listening. Okay, so
Say with that, then I see it to be flexible because there are always amendments.
the amendments does not mean that is flexibility. Flexibility is not necessarily about the amendments, but okay, you could say our tax system is flexible because when COVID happened, they brought COVID levy. Okay, so that means I should take this off.
They brought, the COVID is gone, then they should have taken COVID off.
Oh, but it's a good point. And if COVID is gone, why do they ask? Why do they still? It's like Ghana. When something happens, it comes to stay. Even if that law is cancelled, even if free education will not be anymore, Get Fund will still be there. Even if COVID is no more, anytime a tax comes, it stays. It's like that.
So can we talk of cash flow?
Okay, I think that's a big point, right? Cash flow problem. Some people do not pay tax. Some people do not pay tax because of cash flow problems, right? This is one of the major, I agree. Some people do not have the money because one, withholding taxes have taken all their money. Withholding taxes have taken all their money. VAT has taken all their money.
Personal assessment and all this.
Yes, all these things have taken all their money. So because of cash flow problems, that is why people are not able to pay taxes. Okay, so I think the points so far are not bad. Okay, the next question I want to ask is, why do you think the informal sector in Ghana, okay, why is the informal sector in Ghana the biggest tax haven? A tax haven is a place, right, where people pay low or no taxes at all. Why is the informal sector in Ghana a tax haven? Typical exam question. Why is the informal sector a tax haven? Why do you think there's a lot of tax sheltering or people hide things in the informal sector? Why?
Because of identification.
Yeah.
Mostly they don't register.
Identification problems. Okay, so taxpayer identification problems. Okay, so we can have taxpayer identification problems. Okay. Two, what else are some of the issues? Apart from identification problems, this is a
lack of proper records keeping.
okay, so inadequate records. Okay, so because we do not have adequate records or improper record keeping, right? I like that point. Improper record keeping. It is difficult to establish, right? What other thing is keeping or is making the informal sector a good place to shelter taxes or evade and avoid taxes? Yes, I want more points. We've only got two. So difficulty in identification of taxpayers, inadequate records. What about lack of focus of the tax authorities or the focus on the tax authorities is on the big shots, right? The big guys. True or false? Is it a good point?
True.
So it's mostly on the big formal businesses, right? Because they consider the informal sector to have small amounts of money. So that's why they focus on the petroleum companies and you that you are an employee. The entrepreneur, they know that, oh, it's not guaranteed because it's money. Okay, so some people, we can also say they think that the informal sector has inconsistency in income, right? So they have inconsistent income streams. So a market woman, you don't expect her to make 10,000 cedis every month, right? Inconsistent incomes. Okay. And you know why? They know that if you are paid 10,000 per month, this 10,000 per month is guaranteed. So we can always apply PE. Do you get the idea? But this guy, it's not guaranteed. Sometimes he can make nothing at all. What about that one too? You get it? So the focus is not so much there because we know there are a lot of illiterates. There are people who are doing businesses which are not even categorized as businesses under the tax law. So they don't really see the need. But what at that point? I just want 6 points from here.
The assault on the officers is more than the formal sector.
Okay, so collection is difficult. Let me make it that way. So collection is difficult to collect taxes. Example, the tax stamp thing and the vehicle income taxes are a problem, right? So tax collection is difficult. You say assault on officers. Oh yeah, you're bad. I like it. Yeah, mistake. I remember is here. You go and enter some corner and you say that hey, come and pay tax. I dear the bayon. Okay, I think that was it for the reasons why people avoid and evade taxes.
Prof,
Yes, please.
can we also say the cost associated with the collection
Yes.
might even be
Yes, so you are looking at cost beneficiality, right? So you are looking at what? The cost beneficial aspect of it. So cost of collection may outweigh the benefit, right? Cost of collection may outweigh the revenue collected. Not so. Do you all agree? Because we have to bring more officers because the informal sector covers more than 80% of Ghana's economy. The formal sector is just 20%. If you actually look at it, you know that. So 80%, how many tax officers need to be trained? It comes at a cost, right? How many people need to be employed? They must be paid and all that. Almost sure. A canon bonus is more than the revenue that they are going to collect. But this is not true. There are a lot of hidden revenues, right? See, there's a petroleum company. Let me give you an example. A petroleum company makes revenue of, let's say, 20 billion, right? Its cost, look, its cost are, let's say, 19 billion, okay? So it only has 1 billion in terms of what? In terms of profit, right? Okay. Now this profit will be taxed. They assume this guy has a lot of money. Let's come to the informal sector. For instance, there's a woman who sells building materials. The building materials she sells, there's no cost of sales. How? Her father sells land, and the people who her father gave land to them on concession for a very long time. So she gets the building materials for free, no cost of sales. So everything that comes to the woman is pure revenue. And the revenue sometimes even exceeds this amount of money. Because people from other parts of the world buy building materials for that woman. Because it's cost effective. So assuming this woman just has only revenue of 20 billion, okay? No cost. Isn't she better off than petroleum companies? Hmm? But she's in the informal sector. So, does that make sense? Please, can we go now? So let's look at some
Yes, sir.
tax avoidance and evasion schemes. So this is where people play with the mind of what? The tax authority. So let's look at tax avoidance and evasion schemes. So first, let's look at tax avoidance evasion schemes. I like to go with evasion first. Tax evasion schemes. Now, when it comes to tax evasion schemes, these are various schemes that people go into that do you get it? that we consider as tax evasion? One, what can you give? Give me examples. This one I will not suggest. Let me just give you one. Not paying,
Taxpayer.
not paying the tax itself, right? Is tax evasion. Keeping two sets of accounting books. Example is keeping two sets of VAT books. One you show to GRA, one you use for contract. Very bad. Okay, some
Declaring
people
loss.
intentionally do improper record keeping just so that they will not pay the right amount of tax, right? It's tax evasion scheme. What else?
Declaring loss.
Declaring
Loss.
and declaring losses. Okay. So we can have false and misleading information, right?
Yes.
Where people provide false and misleading information to the tax authorities. Okay, some people you can talk. What is willful default? When we say willful default, what does it mean? Willful default. Willful default. That's just a thing. Willful default.
Can we link that to the tax, the management we discussed about just looking at that at least if you invest, you can get more than you pay now, and the reputation where we discussed about the reputation issue.
Yeah, yeah. You can list, but willful default means that what should that? And I won't pay so much here. You have decided that I have decided to default on my own, maybe for some personal self-interest. That, oh, I do not, this money, let me use it, just like you said, let me use it to do something now, so I won't pay. So you have willfully defaulted. Also, some people will do an extra transaction, right? Working in cash. So working in cash. So some people only work in cash transactions, especially for service businesses. So assuming I own a service business, like let's say tuition, right? And my tutor decides to teach you private class. Okay, and you pay him cash. And I'm doing accounting. If this guy doesn't disclose, how would he know that? How would I know that he taught you and took cash? Would I know?
So there wouldn't be any statement from the bank.
Evidence.
You will
Yes,
use.
of course. But if it was goods, even if there's no statement, you know that the goods will reduce, right? So, 40 units. How they tend to perform. So goods there, you can easily tell that, okay, there's been a movement. Even if they didn't record, how did that movement happen? You get it? But when it comes to what? Services, you cannot tell because a service has some characteristics, right? We know services are simultaneous. Once I'm teaching you are listening, they are heterogeneous, but they are intangible. Because they're intangible, it's difficult, right? They perish, they are perishable. Immediately I finish, it's dead and gone. Do you understand? And nobody can take ownership of it. Because of the characteristics of the service, it makes it difficult. I get it. Because of this, it makes it difficult for you to what? Categorize services, right? In terms of the taxes and any other thing that goes with it. Do you understand? So tax avoidance and tax evasion schemes. When it comes to tax evasion schemes, these are the typical ones. Staying out of the registration system, I can add that. So there are so many things, right? Claiming false expenses, assaulting tax officers, right? So for instance, I can bring here what? Claiming false expenses, right? Expensive. False and misleading statements, lying, right? Assaulting tax officers. Assault on what? Tax officers. Hiding in the what? The informal sector. They are all examples of what? Tax evasion schemes. Okay, so remember if they ask you this. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is tax avoidance schemes.
Hello, sir.
Yes, boss.
Please, the list we just listed out, is it expansion of the 4 taxpayers risk?
Yes,
The registration.
it's just an expansion of those risks. So those risks is what?
Okay.
Now, tax avoidance schemes are just things that are used to create loopholes, right? So let me give you the common ones. The first one I'll talk about is base erosion and profit shifting, right? Base erosion and profit shifting, okay? Or CFC rules. Let's call this income splitting, right? Our law should have called it base erosion. I like it that way because it tells you that what you are eroding your base and shifting your profit to another person. That's what you do. So look, you have company A, okay, which is in Ghana, okay, and company B, which is in the UK. Now look at what happens. Company A in Ghana, no, let's use Mauritius, right? Mauritius pays 5% tax. Company A in Ghana, we pay 25% tax, right? So the group will sit down and say, okay, you know something? We should make sure that this guy pays low tax. And this guy, even if the income is high, his tax will only be 5%, true or false? Does that make sense? His tax will only be 5%. So why not transfer some income to this guy? Are you getting it? Or why not transfer some goods to this guy so that to this guy to become a cost, to increase his cost, thereby reducing his profit, true or false? And reducing his profit means that he pays less tax. Does that make sense? And then to this guy, yes, this will now be selling price to him, but he only ends up paying extra 5% on that amount instead of 25. So you see how they plan the thing. So that at the end of the day, if I decide to sell some goods to this guy, it will end up reducing the impact of the 25% cost. Makes sense? So this is what we'll have. B will now sell goods. Okay, he will intentionally sell goods of, let's say 100,000 to A, right? Okay. So assuming B has selling price or sales, okay, of only that 100,000, and then has cost of sales or cost of operations of 80,000, what happens? That means is what? His profit before tax is how much? 20,000, and you pay tax at what? He's in Mauritius, so he pays tax at, let's say, 5%. So 5% will be how much?
100
So 1,000 cedis, right? Okay. Now let's come to A. Now for A, assuming A still has the same sales of that 100,000 selling to external parties, what happens? Now his cost of sales will be this 100,000 he bought from B, Meboa, which will now what? Reduce the sales by what? 100,000. So what happens? His profit before tax is what? It's zero. Meaning he pays tax of what? Zero. So what's the group tax? The overall group tax. Now, the group will only pay tax of 1,000 plus what? Zero, which is still what? Okay. So what if this transaction didn't happen? What if this transaction didn't happen? That means that this thing, or if this transaction was at the original price it should have been, then this guy will end up paying tax and this guy also end up paying tax. Not so. So people use these things to what? Reduce their tax liability by eroding. You see, I eroded my tax base, which is what? The PBT, the chargeable income here, and I shifted income to another jurisdiction. So base erosion and profit shifting. So base erosion and profit shifting is what causes transfer pricing, what causes all those what do we call it? Income splitting. It's so broad, eh? Income splitting, if I should explain it, I can write 400 pages alone on income splitting. It's so broad. But it's like in our law, because the commissioner is the ultimate superpower when it comes to tax planning, you can do all the tax planning in the world, but the commissioner general can tell you that I will not accept, and you have nothing to say. And it's not fair. Because the law always says in the commissioner's opinion. So if in the commissioner's opinion, he thinks that all the tax planning that you have done is bollocks, that is it. It ends there. You cannot say anything. He'll serve you a notice telling you that he does not agree, he does not like it. The second is transfer pricing, right? So transfer pricing manipulation. So people do transfer pricing manipulations, like what you have seen there. People can manipulate prices just to take advantage of provisions in the law, right? So it's tax avoidance scheme. So they will sell goods that are not at arm's length, right? That is example 3. We can talk about what? Think capitalization, right? Taking advantage of interest. So people will thinly capitalize, right? Because there's a loophole in the law. The law says that you can only borrow interest. You can borrow money or take a loan and use it to buy an asset and use it to fund your business, right? And the interest on it shall be allowed as a deduction. But the law didn't state where, when, and how to get that money. So people took advantage of that loophole. That's what resulted in think capitalization or high gearing. So people take a lot of debt in their business, which has what? Interest. So the interest expense is a deduction. So they take advantage of it. 3 or 4. Another thing people do is to take advantage of what we call closed companies, right? So they take a company, I get and have less than 6 members, right? That's less than 6 members, or not more than 5 members, and they decide to give themselves salaries instead of pay dividends, right? Or pay other things or hide in them without declaring dividends. Okay, it's an example of avoidance schemes in a 5. We can talk about indirect payments. Okay, a lot of companies use indirect payments. So they'll, let's say this company A, you set up company B, and company B also buy shares from company C. So in effect, everybody sees that C paying dividends to company B. Company B is the actual owner, but in actual sense, B also transfers this to company A, who is the real owner or the beneficial owner. So indirectly, this guy is the one enjoying the benefits, not B as people see, right? So this is some of the examples. Indirect payment is an example of what it's an example of what? Tax avoidance scheme. Then we have what? Things like what? Changes in ownership. This is where a lot of companies will try to just what? Change their ownership. I get it, so that they do not end up paying more taxes. Maybe he knows that, oh, if I buy this new company, there are some exemptions that I'm going to get, right? Like VAT, transfer of a going concern is exempt from tax. So they want to take advantage of these things, and the law prohibits people from taking advantage of realization gain. Another thing people can do is the use of replacement assets, right? So replacement assets are dealt with under Section 46. So let's say I have a building and I sell that building and I use it to acquire a similar building. That transaction will be exempt from tax. So all they are doing is just trying to use transactions to defer the payment of tax or convert tax or time taxes and all that, right? To ensure that they get all the incentives and all those things, right? Another thing people can do, there are a lot of them, is change the accounting date. So we can have changes in what? In accounting dates. So there are lots of them, plenty. You can even take advantage of what? Capitalization of profits. Okay. So capitalization of profits is an example of what? Tax avoidance. Taking advantage of repairs and improvement. Do you know why? Because repairs and improvement, this is one of the biggest area of tax planning that people, okay, we don't tell people. But then we used to use this as the biggest area because anytime you are doing repairs and improvement or you are doing restructuring, it is broken into capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. And sometimes we will apportion some of the revenue expenditure as capital expenditure and vice versa to know whether we can get more deductions, right? That is why Section 12 places a limitation on repairs and improvement. We can use financial costs, right, to take advantage of these things. We can use what? So that's why all those things have limitations because the law tries to stop these things from happening. Taking advantage of expenses, right? You can talk about what? Claiming of expenses. So claiming of expenses, I get it. Some people create artificial expenses and make sure that their group company gives what? Maybe a receipt for it. So you think it's real, but it's not real. A receipt will be created automatically, right? Just to get advantage. Let's say I tell you I gave donation to my company, which is a charity. You get it? And it's an approved charity, all right, but it's my group company. So that donation will be allowed as an allowable deduction. I've seen an entity which says it employed fresh graduates, but those fresh graduates, were actually employees of the company. But because of the nature of their transaction, they will accept the deduction, right? So these are some of the tax avoidance and tax evasion schemes. There are a lot of them, but these are common ones that you can state. So I think this is the very first area of tax planning, which we had to look at. But I hope we didn't learn anything new. I hope we didn't learn anything. So that was the first part. There's a B part of the first part, which has to do with anti-avoidance provisions. And in our next meeting, that is what we are going to do, or that is what we are going to dive into and cover.